There was once a woman who lived in a small town, far away from the rush of big cities. She was known to everyone in her neighborhood as a kind, gentle, and hard-working person. Her life looked very simple on the outside. She woke up early every morning, prepared breakfast for her family, cleaned her little home, and then spent the rest of the day either helping neighbors or doing small tasks to earn a little income. To anyone who saw her, she was just another ordinary woman. She had no special titles, no higher education, no big job, and no fancy lifestyle. But behind her quiet face was a heart filled with dreams that she never shared with many people. When she was younger, she had loved learning. Books had always been her best friends. While her friends played outside, she would sit near a window with a pencil and notebook, scribbling numbers and trying to solve puzzles. Mathematics fascinated her in a way that even she could not explain. She felt that numbers had a secret language, and solving problems was like unlocking little mysteries. But her life had never been easy. Her family could not afford to send her to good schools for long, and after a certain age, she had to leave her studies to help at home. Slowly, her dream of becoming someone educated faded into the background, and she accepted her role as a simple woman living a simple life. Still, her passion for learning never truly died. At night, when the house was quiet, she would sometimes take out an old math book that she had kept from her school days. The pages were yellow, the ink faded, but she treasured it like a piece of gold. She would read the problems and try to solve them in her notebook. Some days she succeeded, other days she struggled, but her curiosity never went away. She never told anyone about this secret habit, because people would laugh and say, "Why waste time with school problems when you have a family to look after?" And so, she kept this part of her life hidden. Years went by, and she became known as someone dependable in her community. People came to her when they needed advice or help with small matters. If a child was struggling with basic arithmetic, she would sit with them and explain patiently. No one thought much of it, they only saw her as kind, not as someone with extraordinary talent. In her heart, though, she carried the silent love for mathematics. One day, something unusual happened that would change how everyone saw her. There was a small educational program being held in her town. A local school had started free evening classes for adults who wanted to improve their reading or learn new skills. Many men and women joined, most of them hoping to read better, write letters, or simply understand simple subjects. She was encouraged by her neighbor to join as well. At first, she laughed at the idea. She thought she was too old to sit in a classroom again. But her neighbor insisted, "It will be fun, and you can at least get out of the house for a while." After some hesitation, she agreed. When she entered the classroom, it felt like she had stepped back in time. The smell of chalk, the sound of a blackboard being cleaned, and the chatter of students all reminded her of her school days. She took a seat quietly at the back, not wanting to draw any attention. The teacher, a middle-aged man with a cheerful face, welcomed everyone warmly. He encouraged the class by saying that learning has no age and that every mind is capable of growth if it is given the chance. His words touched her deeply, and she felt glad she had come. For the first few days, the lessons were simple. They covered reading, writing, and very basic math. Most of the adults were satisfied with this level, and they smiled proudly when they could write a full sentence or solve a small multiplication problem. She too joined in, though she already knew more than what was being taught. She didn't want to stand out, so she simply followed along quietly. But one evening, as the class was going on, something unexpected occurred. The teacher, wanting to entertain the students, decided to make a little joke. He turned to the blackboard and wrote a problem in calculus, something far beyond the level of anyone in the room. It was a problem involving derivatives, with strange symbols and numbers that looked almost like a foreign language to most of the students. He laughed lightly and said, "Now, who among you wants to try this?" This is what college students study. Maybe one of you will surprise me. The students chuckled nervously. Some shook their heads, others whispered, "That looks impossible." The teacher then looked around the room, and with a playful smile, he pointed at the quiet woman in the back. "You," he said jokingly, "why don't you try this?" The class burst into laughter. They all thought it was a harmless joke. After all, what chance did a simple woman, who spent her life cooking, cleaning, and working small jobs, have at solving such a difficult mathematical problem? Some of the students covered their mouths to hide their giggles, while others simply waited to see her embarrassed reaction. But to everyone's surprise, she did not laugh or look uncomfortable. Instead, she sat still for a moment, her eyes fixed on the board. The symbols and numbers, which looked strange to others, seemed familiar to her. Something inside her stirred, something she had kept hidden for so long. She slowly stood up, and without saying a word, walked towards the front of the class. The room went quiet. The laughter stopped. The students watched with wide eyes, wondering what she was going to do. The teacher too seemed a little surprised by her calmness, but he kept his playful smile, assuming she would just scribble something random and return to her seat. She reached the blackboard, picked up the piece of chalk with steady hands, and looked at the equation again. Memories from her younger days flashed before her eyes, nights when she sat by a dim lamp, working through problems from her old math book, trying to understand the deeper mysteries of numbers. Without hesitation, she began to write. Her hand moved slowly at first, as though she was recalling the steps from memory. But soon, her writing grew faster and more confident. She explained each step softly as she wrote, her voice calm but firm. The students leaned forward, trying to follow what she was doing, though most of them could not understand the higher-level concepts. Still, they could sense that her steps were not random scribbles, they were logical and precise. The teacher's playful smile faded, replaced by a look of surprise. He walked closer to the board, watching her solve the problem with the skill of someone who had studied mathematics seriously. In just a few minutes, she reached the final answer, placed the chalk down, and turned around quietly. The room was so silent that even the ticking of the clock could be heard. Then came a wave of murmurs, followed by gasps of amazement. The students stared at her as though they were seeing her for the first time. The teacher himself looked stunned, almost speechless. What had started as a small joke had just revealed something extraordinary. The simple woman, whom everyone thought of as ordinary, had done something that none of them expected. She had solved a calculus problem in front of the whole class, and in that moment, she was no longer just the quiet lady from the back row. She was someone special, someone who carried a hidden brilliance that had finally come to light. The classroom stayed silent for several moments after she put the chalk down. Everyone had expected laughter, but what they got instead was a moment they would never forget. The teacher looked at the board again, then at her, and then back at the board, as if he was making sure his eyes were not playing tricks on him. The answer was correct, every step neat, clear, and exact. The students stared in disbelief. Some whispered to each other, some simply blinked in shock, and a few even rubbed their eyes as though they were watching a dream. This was not supposed to happen. She was the last person they expected to solve a problem even advanced students often struggled with. The teacher cleared his throat. That was correct, he admitted, still surprised. His voice trembled slightly, because even he could not understand how she managed to do it. He had given the problem only as a joke, never imagining that anyone in the room would even know where to begin. But here was this quiet, simple woman, who had not only understood it but solved it with the confidence of a trained student. Instead of smiling or celebrating, she simply lowered her eyes and walked back to her seat. She did not act proud or boastful. In fact, she looked almost shy, as though she had revealed a secret she never wanted anyone to know. The class began buzzing with murmurs. "How did she do that?" one whispered. Did she study in college before? Another asked. No, I think she just guessed, a doubtful voice suggested, but even that sounded weak, because it was clear her solution had been no guess. The teacher raised his hand, silencing the class. No, she didn't guess. That was proper calculus. I teach these topics to college students, and even some of them cannot do it so smoothly. This is amazing. He turned his gaze towards her again. Where did you learn this? She hesitated for a moment. Her fingers nervously twisted the edge of her scarf. She had never expected to be questioned in this way, never thought her hidden interest in mathematics would be revealed so suddenly. Finally, she spoke softly, I used to study a little when I was young. I loved it. But I couldn't continue my studies. Still, I never stopped trying to learn on my own. Her words hung in the air. The students listened with growing respect. They realized she was not just an ordinary woman who happened to solve one lucky problem. She was someone who had quietly carried a passion for learning through the struggles of her life. The teacher nodded slowly, still amazed. So, you taught yourself? She gave a small smile. Yes. I had some old books. I didn't understand everything at first, but I kept trying. Sometimes it took me weeks to solve one question. But I never gave up. I just enjoyed it. Her honesty touched everyone in the room. Some of the students lowered their eyes, feeling embarrassed. They had often complained about learning, saying it was too hard or too boring. But here was a woman who had no formal classes, no teachers guiding her, and still, she had managed to master things they could not even imagine. The teacher felt a wave of respect rising inside him. What had started as a simple joke now felt like a lesson for himself as well. He realized he had underestimated her because of her appearance and background. But knowledge, he now saw clearly, did not belong only to classrooms and degrees, it belonged to anyone with the hunger to learn. The class could not stop talking about what they had just witnessed. Even after the lesson ended, small groups of students gathered outside the school building, still discussing her. She must be a genius, one said. All this time, we thought she was just quiet because she didn't know much. But now I think she knows more than any of us. The story began to spread around the town. By the next day, neighbors and acquaintances were already talking about her surprising talent. Some people were proud and said, she proved that knowledge can never be wasted. Others were simply shocked, unable to believe that the same woman who carried water buckets or helped neighbors with chores could solve a problem that looked like a riddle from another world. At home, she returned to her routine. She cooked, cleaned, and looked after her family, just as she always had. But deep inside, she felt something had shifted. She had lived quietly for so long, hiding her love for mathematics, but now it had been revealed to the world. She wasn't sure if she liked the attention or not, but she felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her hidden work had not been in vain. The teacher, however, could not forget what had happened. He kept thinking about her solution, about her story, and about how much untapped potential lay in people who never had the chance to study formally. The next evening, when the class gathered again, he looked at her with a new kind of respect. This time, instead of ignoring her or making light jokes, he invited her to the front. "Would you like to help me explain something to the class?" he asked politely. She was taken aback. "Me?" "Yes," he said with a warm smile. "I believe you have something to teach us all. Not just mathematics, but also patience and dedication." The class looked at her expectantly. She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly, but then she nodded. She walked to the front, took the chalk again, and began explaining a simple problem. She spoke slowly, making sure everyone understood. The students listened more carefully than ever before. Somehow, her gentle tone and patient style made the subject feel less frightening. Even those who had struggled with numbers before now found themselves paying attention, trying to follow her steps. By the end of that lesson, the atmosphere had changed completely. She was no longer just a student at the back of the class. She had become a source of inspiration. People began approaching her after class, asking her to explain things again, seeking her help with problems, and even sharing their personal struggles. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as someone ordinary, but as someone with value beyond chores and daily struggles. She realized that her journey of silent self-learning could now become a light for others. But along with admiration, there were also doubts. Some whispered, maybe she just knew that one topic. She cannot know everything. Others felt uncomfortable that someone without formal education could outshine them. She heard the whispers but did not let them hurt her. She simply smiled and continued to focus on what she loved. The teacher, however, had no doubts. He decided to bring her more advanced books and encouraged her to keep learning. "You have a gift," he told her. "Don't let it stay hidden anymore. The world needs to see it." That night, as she sat in her small room, she looked at the old math book she had kept for years. Its pages were torn, the cover faded, but it had been her loyal companion. She thought about how far she had come with only this book and her determination. A gentle tear slid down her cheek, not of sadness, but of quiet joy. She realized that the small spark she had kept alive inside her heart had finally started to glow brightly for the world to see. The days that followed became very different from what she had known before. The classroom that had once been filled with casual laughter and light lessons now carried a new kind of energy. Every evening when she walked in, eyes turned toward her with curiosity and respect. Students who earlier never paid attention now wanted to sit closer, hoping to learn from her. It was as though the air in the room had changed. Everyone felt they were in the presence of someone extraordinary, though she still carried herself with the same quiet humility as always. The teacher began involving her more in the lessons. Sometimes he would solve the problems, and other times he would pause and ask her to share her method. She never boasted or acted as if she was superior. She explained slowly, making sure everyone understood. Her way of teaching was simple, free from heavy terms or complicated language. She broke things down into small steps, often using everyday examples that her classmates could relate to. This was something even the teacher admired, because where he sometimes failed to connect, she succeeded with her gentle explanations. But with this new respect also came challenges. Not everyone liked seeing her shine. A few classmates began whispering behind her back. They felt uncomfortable that a woman with no degrees, no formal higher education, could suddenly be admired so much. Some even muttered, maybe it was just luck. Maybe she memorized some things from somewhere. How can she know more than us? These doubts reached her ears, but she chose silence. She had lived with struggles before. A few jealous whispers could not shake her. At home, her family too began noticing changes. Her children looked at her differently now, proudly telling their friends, "My mother knows more mathematics than even teachers." Neighbors came to visit, curious to ask, "Is it true you solved those problems?" She would only smile gently and say, "I just studied a little." She never let pride enter her heart. To her, learning was not about showing off. It was about the quiet joy of discovery. One evening, the teacher brought a new challenge. He entered the class carrying a heavy book, filled with advanced problems. The students gasped when they saw the thick volume. He smiled and said, "I want to see how far we can go." He turned to her respectfully and added, "With your help, I believe we can try things even college students fear." She hesitated. A small part of her worried that maybe this time she would fail, and people would laugh again. But then she reminded herself of all those lonely nights she had spent bent over her old book, solving one problem after another. She had struggled, failed, and tried again. Failure no longer frightened her. So, She nodded with quiet determination. That evening, they worked on a complex problem together. The teacher started, explaining the theory, while she stood beside him, adding small steps and clarifications in her soft, patient voice. The class followed with amazement. By the time they reached the final answer, the room erupted in applause. For many students, it was the first time they truly enjoyed mathematics. For her, it was another proof that knowledge, once hidden, could shine and guide others. Soon, her story spread beyond the small class. A local newspaper heard about the simple woman who solved calculus and sent a reporter to meet her. She felt nervous when the reporter asked her questions, but she answered honestly, speaking about her childhood love for numbers and how she had never stopped learning despite life's difficulties. The next week, her picture appeared in the paper, and suddenly, everyone in town was talking about her. Some praised her, calling her an inspiration. Mothers pointed at her story and told their children, "See? If she can do it without schooling, you have no excuse." Others, however, grew critical. A few educated people scoffed and said, "This is just a dramatic story. Real mathematics needs formal study. She cannot really know that much." These criticisms reached her ears too, but she remained calm. She had never studied to prove herself to others, she had studied because she loved it. That love was enough to keep her strong. Her life, however, did begin to change in small ways. Students from nearby schools came to meet her, asking her to explain problems they struggled with. She patiently sat with them, guiding them step by step. Even when she had chores waiting at home, she gave her time generously. She felt a deep satisfaction in seeing the eyes of young students light up with understanding. The teacher continued to support her. He gave her access to more books, sometimes even bringing borrowed copies from his colleagues at colleges. Late into the night, after finishing her household work, she would sit by the dim light of a lamp, turning pages filled with strange symbols and theorems. Many times, the problem seemed impossible at first, but she did not give up. She believed that every hard question had a door, and with patience, that door would open. Her children often watched her quietly as she worked. One of them once asked, "Mother, why do you still study? You don't need to." She smiled gently and replied, "Because learning makes me feel alive. It reminds me that there is always more to discover in this world." Those words stayed with them, and slowly, her passion became a guiding flame for her entire family. But as her name began to spread, so did new pressures. A few local officials invited her to events, asking her to share her journey. Standing before a crowd was something she had never imagined. Her hands trembled, her voice shook at first, but when she began speaking, silence fell. She told them about her childhood, about leaving school, about her nights of self-study. She did not use fancy words, but her honesty touched hearts. People in the audience, many of whom had given up on learning, felt a spark reignite inside them. She was slowly becoming more than just a woman solving math problems. She was becoming a symbol, a reminder that it was never too late, that passion and persistence could break barriers. Yet, deep inside, she remained the same. After returning from such events, she would still sweep her floor, cook dinner, and wash clothes. She never let admiration change her simplicity. When people called her a genius, she shook her head and said softly, "I am not a genius. I am just someone who didn't stop trying." Still, the more she achieved, the more some critics grew restless. A group of educated men once challenged her, saying, "If you are really that capable, solve this advanced question." They handed her a complicated problem, expecting her to fail. She looked at it quietly, studied it for a while, and then began solving. Her solution was not only correct but also creative, showing a method even they had not considered. At that moment, their pride melted into silence. Some lowered their eyes in respect, while others left quietly, unwilling to admit their mistake. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about how her life had changed so unexpectedly. Just months ago, she had been invisible to most people, just another face in the crowd. Now, she was being spoken of with admiration, sometimes with envy, sometimes with doubt, but always with interest. She realized something important: it was not only about solving math problems. It was about proving that passion could give anyone the strength to rise, no matter how ordinary they seemed. The small classroom where it had all begun still remained her favorite place. Whenever she stepped inside, she felt at peace. It was where her hidden world had first been revealed, where she had shown not just others but also herself what she was capable of. And as the days went by, she knew her journey was far from over. This was only the beginning of something bigger, something that would not only change her life but also inspire countless others who felt trapped by their circumstances. As the days turned into weeks, her life became more colorful than it had ever been. She was still the same woman who carried out her household chores, cooked meals, and looked after her family, but now there was a new spark in everything she did. The quiet strength she had always carried inside her was finally visible to the world. People who once barely noticed her now greeted her warmly in the market, smiled at her when she passed by, and even stopped to ask about her journey. It was strange for her at first, but slowly she began to accept this new attention with grace. The evening classes continued, and each day felt like a new adventure. The teacher, who had once pointed at her as part of a harmless joke, now treated her with genuine respect. He often said to the class, "We are lucky to have her among us. She shows us that learning is not about age or background. It is about determination." Whenever he said this, she lowered her eyes shyly, but inside, she felt grateful that someone finally understood her true passion. Her classmates too had changed. Many who earlier struggled with numbers began to ask her for guidance. She never refused anyone. She would sit patiently, explaining the smallest details, repeating steps again and again until the person in front of her understood. Her kindness and patience made her not only admired but also deeply loved by the people around her. For many of the women in the class, she became a role model. They said, "If she can do it, then maybe we can also achieve something we thought was impossible." But this new journey was not without its challenges. With respect and admiration also came expectations. People began to look at her as if she had all the answers, as if she could solve every problem, not just in mathematics but in life itself. Sometimes this felt heavy on her shoulders. She often asked herself quietly, "What if I make a mistake one day? Will they still believe in me?" But then she reminded herself that she had never studied to impress others. She had studied because she loved the beauty of learning. That thought gave her peace. One day, the teacher brought news that surprised everyone. A nearby college had heard about her story and invited her to attend a seminar. The idea of speaking in front of college students and professors filled her with nervousness. She had never stepped into such an environment before. She worried about her simple clothes, her lack of formal education, and whether people would laugh at her. But the teacher encouraged her gently. "You don't need to wear anything special," he said. "Your knowledge and your honesty are enough. Go and show them what determination looks like." So she went. The seminar hall was large, filled with young students and professors. At first, she felt small and out of place. She sat quietly in a corner, hoping no one would notice her. But when her name was announced, she stood up slowly and walked to the stage. Her hands trembled slightly, but when she looked at the curious faces in front of her, she felt a sudden calmness. She spoke simply, telling her story as it was: how she had loved learning as a child, how life had forced her to leave school, how she had continued studying alone in secret, and how one day a joke in class had revealed her hidden passion. The hall was silent as she spoke. Her words were not decorated with fancy language, but they carried honesty and strength. When she finished, the audience rose in applause. Some students even came forward to thank her personally, saying her story gave them hope. Professors, who had spent their lives teaching, admitted that they were inspired by her persistence. For her, it was a moment she never imagined would happen. She realized that her journey had not only been about herself, it had become a light for many others. After that day, more opportunities opened up. Schools invited her to meet students, community centers asked her to share her experiences, and people from nearby towns wanted to hear her story. At first, she felt overwhelmed, but soon she saw the purpose in it. Every time she spoke, she noticed how eyes lit up, how hearts softened, and how people who had once given up on their dreams suddenly felt inspired to try again. She understood then that her struggles had not been wasted. They had shaped her into someone who could encourage others. Back in her own home, she remained humble. She still woke up early, cooked for her family, and carried out her daily duties. But her children now looked at her with a new sense of pride. They told her, "Mother, you are not just our mother. You are our teacher and our hero." Hearing those words filled her heart with warmth. She felt that even though life had taken away her chance to study in her youth, it had returned that gift to her in another form. Yet not everyone accepted her success with open arms. Some people in the community remained doubtful. They said, "What good is solving math problems? It won't change anything in real life." Others whispered that she was receiving too much attention for something small. These comments sometimes hurt, but she chose not to argue. She believed that every person had the right to their opinion. Her focus was on those who found strength through her story, not on those who doubted. Meanwhile, the teacher continued to guide her. He gave her more advanced books, some even written in languages that were difficult for her to understand. She struggled at times, but instead of giving up, she looked for translations, asked questions, and slowly built her knowledge further. Her hunger for learning was endless. She often said to herself, "The more I learn, the more I realize how much more there is left to know." Her evenings became filled with visits from young students who wanted her help. They brought their notebooks, sat around her small table, and listened carefully as she explained. For many of them, she made mathematics less frightening. She told them, "Don't be afraid of mistakes. Every mistake is a step closer to understanding." Her gentle words gave them courage, and slowly, many of them began to improve in their studies. As time passed, she realized that her life had found a new purpose. It was no longer just about solving problems on paper. It was about solving the doubts in people's hearts, the doubt that said they were not capable, the doubt that whispered it was too late, the doubt that told them to give up. She wanted to erase those doubts with her story, just as she erased mistakes from her notebook. One evening, after finishing her chores, she sat by her lamp with her old math book in her hands. She turned the pages slowly, remembering the many nights she had spent with it. This book had been her silent friend when no one believed in her, and now it felt like a symbol of her journey. She whispered softly to herself, "I am still that girl who loved numbers. Nothing has changed, except now the world knows." The journey had not been easy, but every struggle, every sacrifice, and every quiet night of study had led her to this point. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just a simple woman in the eyes of others. She had become proof that passion and persistence could break even the strongest walls. And though she had achieved so much already, she knew deep inside that this was not the end. Her heart told her that greater challenges and greater opportunities still lay ahead. She did not fear them. Instead, she looked forward with courage, ready to continue walking the path that destiny had finally opened for her. The season slowly changed, but her journey only grew brighter. The woman who had once been known as quiet and ordinary was now spoken of in many places as a symbol of determination. Every day brought a new moment that reminded her how far she had come, and yet, she never lost the simplicity of her heart. She still tied her scarf the same way, still cooked in her small kitchen, still swept the same floors. But now, when she walked out into the world, she carried with her a light that others could see and feel. The evening classes continued to be her favorite part of the day. She never missed a single session, no matter how busy her household work became. For her, that classroom had become more than a place of learning, it was where she had rediscovered herself. The other students admired her not just for her knowledge but also for her kindness. She never made anyone feel small for not understanding. Instead, she patiently explained, again and again, until their eyes lit up with clarity. That was her gift, not only the ability to solve problems but also the ability to give courage. The teacher often found himself standing silently, watching her as she guided the class. He knew that he had once underestimated her, but now he felt honored to sit beside her. Sometimes he even joked, "I may be the teacher here, but she is the one teaching all of us patience." The class would laugh warmly, and she would smile shyly, never letting pride touch her heart. As word about her spread, she began receiving letters from people she had never met. Some wrote about how they had given up on studies but found new hope after hearing her story. Others said they had always feared mathematics but now felt encouraged to try again. She kept those letters carefully in a small box, reading them whenever she felt tired. Each word reminded her that her struggles were not just her own, they had become a source of strength for others. One day, she received an invitation that surprised her deeply. A nearby city was hosting an educational event where speakers were invited to inspire young students. Her name was included among the guests. When she first read the letter, she almost laughed in disbelief. "Me," she whispered to herself. "I am just a simple woman. How can I stand on such a big stage?" But her teacher encouraged her, her children urged her, and her heart told her this was a chance she could not refuse. When the day arrived, she traveled to the city with nervous excitement. The event hall was far larger than anything she had ever seen. Hundreds of students sat waiting, their eyes filled with curiosity. She walked slowly to the stage, her steps trembling, but when she began to speak, her voice found strength. She told them her story about her childhood love for learning, the struggles that forced her to leave school, the secret nights with her old math book, and the day a joke had revealed her hidden world. She spoke simply, with no big words, but her honesty carried power. By the time she finished, the hall erupted in applause. Many students had tears in their eyes. Teachers stood and clapped with respect. That moment became one of the most unforgettable days of her life. She realized then that her journey was never about proving herself to others, it was about lighting a spark in those who felt lost. And on that stage, she saw hundreds of sparks begin to glow. Back in her town, life continued, but with new meaning. Students from other areas came to see her, sitting in her small home, notebooks in hand. She never charged anyone money, never turned anyone away. She taught them not only mathematics but also resilience. She reminded them that failure was not the end but a step toward success. Her words carried the weight of her own struggles, and that made them powerful. Yet, even as she inspired so many, she kept reminding herself of one truth: she was still a student. Each night, she continued to study, turning pages of books, struggling with problems, and learning new ideas. She often said softly to herself, "There is no end to knowledge. The day I stop learning will be the day I stop living." That thought kept her moving forward. There were still people who doubted her, of course. Some said her success was just a story made bigger than it really was. Others claimed it was luck or that she had secretly been taught by someone else. But she no longer felt hurt by such words. She had learned that when people doubt you, it is often because they do not see the strength within themselves. She chose instead to focus on those who believed, those who wanted to learn, and those who needed hope. Her children, who once only saw her as their quiet mother, now saw her as their greatest role model. They studied harder, worked with more dedication, and proudly told others, "Our mother showed us that nothing is impossible." For her, this was the greatest reward, not applause from strangers, not recognition in newspapers, but the pride shining in her children's eyes. Over time, she was invited to more places, sometimes schools, sometimes gatherings of women, sometimes community centers. Everywhere she went, she carried the same message: never give up on learning, never believe that it is too late, and never think you are too small to achieve something big. She reminded people that education is not only found in classrooms but also in determination, in curiosity, and in the courage to keep going even when no one believes in you. Her life had transformed in ways she had never imagined, yet she never allowed success to make her arrogant. She still helped neighbors with their small tasks, still listened to people's problems, still remained the gentle soul she had always been. People often wondered how someone who had achieved so much could remain so humble, and the answer was simple: she never saw herself as above anyone else. She believed everyone had their own hidden brilliance, waiting for the right moment to shine. One quiet evening, as she sat by the lamp with her old math book, she thought back to the very first day in the classroom when the teacher had pointed at her as a joke. She remembered the laughter of the students, the problem on the board, the chalk in her hand, and the silence that had followed her solution. A small smile spread across her face. That single moment had changed everything. It had unlocked a door she had kept closed for years. It had shown her that her passion was not something to be hidden but something to be shared. She closed the book gently and whispered, "Thank you." It was a thank you not just to the book but to life itself for giving her a chance to prove that dreams never truly die. They may sleep quietly for years, but with courage, they can awaken and change everything. Her story became a legend in her town and beyond. People told it again and again, not just as a tale about mathematics, but as a lesson about hope. They said, if she could rise from nothing and surprise the world, then so can we. And in this way, her life touched many more than she would ever personally meet. Though she never sought fame, it had found her. Though she never asked for recognition, it had followed her. And though she had begun as just a simple woman with an old book and a secret dream, she had become something far greater, a living proof that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. And so, her journey continued, not as a quiet, hidden story, but as a shining example. Wherever she went, she carried her light, reminding the world that true greatness does not come from wealth, titles, or education alone. It comes from passion, persistence, and the courage to never give up.